One morning, you wake up and realize you don't want anything anymore. Not out of despair, not because everything has collapsed, but because there's nothing left worth chasing. You're not in pain, but you also don't see a reason to move forward. A few months ago, you might have gone through something, a breaking point, a moment of awakening. You saw the truth, saw through all the roles, the races, the masks you once called me. And when that dust fell away, you thought you'd feel free. You thought you'd be lit from within. But no, what remained was silence, a strange kind of stillness, not intense, not dark, just an emptiness covering you from the inside. You sit there, watching your old life still spinning, everyone else still excited, still chasing, still setting goals. And you, like someone lost in the middle of the crowd, no longer feel like you belong anywhere. You're not lazy, you're not avoiding life, you just don't feel any drive. Here's a truth most won't tell you. After awakening, not everyone feels relief, not everyone lights up. Sometimes the first thing you feel is loss of direction, loss of that inner voice that used to guide you, loss of that constant push to do something. What used to pull you out of bed each morning suddenly disappears, and no one sees it but you. You still live, you still work, you still smile. But inside, it feels like a room of cooled ashes. No screaming, no tears, just a quiet hollowing, like a part of you left and hasn't returned. You start to ask questions. Am I off track? Is this depression? Or is this something deeper, something without a name? Maybe this isn't the end. Maybe this is the first door, not a door that opens outward, but inward. Because when you stop chasing anything, maybe that's the moment you begin to become something more true, not through effort, but through emptiness. An emptiness still enough to hear the calling you once ignored. You're not lazy. You're unraveling, not to disappear, but to become. If this is happening within you, know this: you are not alone. Not many talk about this phase, but if you're in it, stay. Because maybe you're not losing your motivation. Maybe your old fire has gone out, so a new one can begin to rise. There was a time when you knew exactly who you were, the one who got things done, the one who always had a goal, the one who never gave up. You were responsible, respected, a person with a clear path ahead. Every morning, you knew what time to wake up, what to do first, and why it mattered. Not because you were forcing yourself, but because you believed in the system you were building. You believed in yourself, in the version of you had spent years carefully shaping. And then, somehow, cracks began to show. No sirens, no loud shattering, just a quiet shift. Things no longer felt the same. And you looked at the work you used to be proud of, and felt no fire. You looked at the achievements that once motivated you, and they felt distant, almost foreign. You heard the praise, the nods of approval, and wondered, am I just pretending to enjoy this? Carl Jung called this a psychological death. It doesn't kill you. It dissolves the version of you that you once thought was real. Many confuse this with a breakdown, but it doesn't feel like burnout. And it's not quite depression either. It's when old meanings no longer match your being. Even when you try to go back, try to convince yourself, you can't summon that old feeling that once made life feel full. You begin to look around and see others still running full speed. They're still chasing what you once chased. They still believe in what you once believed. And maybe they're still finding joy in it. But you're standing on the edge of a game that no longer has your name on the scoreboard. You can pretend to play, but deep down, you know you stepped off the field long ago. You don't know what changed. You only know that the drive that carried you for years has melted like fog in morning light. It's gone, and you haven't found anything new to replace it. You begin to feel lost, not because there's nothing to do, but because everything now feels unreal. You still show up. You still meet your responsibilities. You still keep up appearances. But deep inside, something is drifting, quietly, wordlessly, like an iceberg hollowing from beneath the surface. And the scariest part isn't being lost. It's not wanting to go anywhere anymore. No new compass, no new spark, just a blank space, like uncharted land, waiting for a name. Maybe you've tried to resist, tried to return to your old habits, tried reading those same books again, tried focusing, working harder, making new plans. But each attempt only makes one thing clearer. You're no longer that person. The person who knew what they wanted, why they wanted it, and what it took to get there. The one who defined their worth through output, results, and recognition. Now you look at yourself and you're not sure if you still believe in those things. You're like an actor who just stepped off stage. The lights are off, the audience is gone, the script has ended, and you're left standing there in the dark, holding a question you haven't quite dared to speak. If I'm no longer playing a role, then who am I? This is when the old self begins to shed. Not like taking off a jacket, but like skin that's dried and cracked, falling away on its own, without you needing to force it. Not to punish you, but to return you to a shape you've never truly lived in. You don't know where you're going, but at the very least, you know this. You're no longer the person who walked through that first door, and sometimes that alone is enough to mark a beginning. There's a kind of loneliness you can't quite name. It's not the loneliness of heartbreak, not the loneliness of being abandoned. It's the kind of loneliness that lives in the middle of a crowd, surrounded by people who still love you, still talk to you, but can no longer reach where you are. You still eat dinner with your family. You still go to work, reply to messages, update your social media. You're still okay. But inside, you're living on a different level, a deeper level, slower, farther. And strangely, no one sees that level. No one realizes you've stepped off the ground they're still standing on. You're still standing there, but not on the same self you once were. You can't explain it to them, because you don't have the words, because you yourself still don't fully understand what's happening. And deep down, you know, they've never walked through this territory, so they can't stay here with you. You've tried sharing a few things. They nod, smile, tell you to stay positive, take a trip. Maybe it's just stress. And so, you go quiet, not because you've shut down, but because no one's listening from the depth where you now live. The world still spins on the surface, still busy, still clear, still driven by goals, motivation, productivity. But you're in a place with no road signs, no deadlines, no timeline, just a blank space, like you've wandered into a page no one has written on yet. And that emptiness, it isn't terrifying, it's just hard to share. You don't know who could understand that. You're not sad, but you're not happy either. You're not tired, but you don't want to do anything. You're not hopeless, but you're not hopeful. You're just here, alone, not needing to be saved, just wanting to be seen. It's an unspoken longing. Let someone see me. Not to fix me, not to lift me up, but just to sit with me where I am. You don't need answers. You don't need reasons. You just need presence. Someone who understands that this silence is not a void. It's a phase. Carl Jung once said, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. But in this phase, you meet no one else. You only meet yourself, with no mask left to wear. And because of that, you feel bare, exposed. No one knows. No one reaches in. No one walks beside you. But the truth is, there are many others, also sitting in this blank space. They too are alone, also disconnected, also moving without a destination, also silent. Not because they have nothing to say, but because the truth inside them hasn't yet found the words to be spoken. You are not alone. You are in a sacred isolation, where the old self quietly steps back and a new shape begins to form in the silence. No one understands you right now, but maybe, for the first time, You are finally seeing yourself, clearly, wholly. And if you're still here, still listening, still feeling a part of yourself in these words, then walk with me, just a little further. You don't know exactly when it began. One morning, you just woke up feeling no longer like yourself. Nothing dramatic happened, no tragedy. You simply stopped resisting the feeling of dissolving, as if every structure you once built, your identity, your roles, your beliefs, was slowly softening, not breaking, not shattering, just melting. You no longer wanted to run, no longer needed to prove anything, no longer felt the urge to force yourself to be better. And you began to sense that you were inside a cocoon. No one locked you in. No one closed the door. You just found yourself here. A place where every sound from the outside fades, where every familiar goal feels distant, where you're not hurt, but you're no longer solid either. You're melting, like a caterpillar turning to liquid before becoming a butterfly. It's a stage no one talks about, because it's not beautiful, not powerful. It doesn't produce anything you can showcase. It's simply dissolution. Jung called it enantiodromia, an extreme shift, from doing to stillness, from busy to powerless, from logic to fog. No anchor, no map, no instructions. You don't know who you're becoming, only that you can't go back to who you were. The cocoon is the scariest place because here, you have no shape. You're no longer the person tied to your job title, no longer the one proud of relationships, plans, or progress, no longer the one who knew exactly what the next 5 years would look like. You are now a breath without a name floating in a space that hasn't yet taken form. And here's the thing, no one can step into that cocoon with you. No one can help you dissolve. No one can do the work your soul is now arranging. At this stage, your mind will panic. It hates not being productive. It hates stillness. It hates the thought, I'm not moving forward. It will whisper, you're being lazy, you're failing, you're wasting time. But deeper than that voice is another sound, the sound of being reborn. Not in the way society celebrates, but in the way your soul understands. You must fully dissolve before you can take on a new form. The old self cannot learn to fly. Only when it melts completely, only when everything returns to a raw original state, can wings begin to form. This is not the time to do something. This is the time to stay with yourself in a space without shape. You might feel useless, like you're not contributing, like you're not worthy. But that's the illusion of the ego. Because the self, the deepest part of you, doesn't need you to be worthy. It only needs you to be real. And sometimes the most real thing you can do is to stay in the cocoon, even when you have nothing to show for it. You've spent a lifetime explaining yourself. Explaining why you chose a certain job, why you ended a relationship, why you needed to change. But now, you no longer want to explain. Not because you don't care, but because you no longer have the words to name what's happening. You don't know where you're going. You don't know who you're becoming. And you begin to live in a quiet space that cannot be described. This is the space most easily misunderstood. From the outside, people see you speak less, do less, show up less. They worry, they advise, they push. Some even walk away, because no one taught them this. Silence is also a way of existing, a very deep one. Silence is not a sign of collapse. It's a signal of preparation. In nature, the most powerful growth always begins with a winter. No one sees the roots reaching deeper. No one sees the water finding a new path. No one sees a creature asleep. But that sleep is essential for survival. You are not failing. You are resting from the roles you've been playing. You are not avoiding life. You are giving yourself a chance to exist without being covered up by functions, goals, or titles. In a society obsessed with productivity, rest is mistaken for laziness. Stillness is mistaken for uselessness. Lack of direction is mistaken for disorder. But beneath all those judgments lives an ancient truth. Every strong soul must pass through a phase of not knowing who they are, not because they're lost, but because they are being dismantled to become something greater. So allow yourself to be quiet, not to escape the world, but to listen to what is slowly emerging from within. Because one day, in the middle of this silence, you will begin to hear the first whispers of the self. Not a grand calling, but a subtle tremble, like the first sound of life in a space that never had a name. And if you're ready, the next part will guide you out of the cocoon, not as a sudden leap, but as a current beginning to find its way from within. One morning, without warning, you'll feel something small, not a big idea, not a grand rebirth plan, just a soft touch from within, as if something deep inside you has quietly nodded. It's not the old self, not the old drive to prove. It's something ancient, distant, and yet somehow close. Jung called this the emergence of the self, the original soul within you. It isn't shaped by expectations. It isn't pushed by achievement. It isn't driven by fear. The self doesn't arrive like a blinding light. It often enters your life as a quiet intuition, subtle but deeply real. You won't feel energized, but you will find yourself wanting to do something, not because you should, but because you simply can't not do it. You begin to write, even though no one told you to. You reorganize your living space, even though there's no clear reason. You call someone you haven't spoken to in years, just because it feels right. It's not a plan. It's a response to something that has quietly begun to live inside you. Jung called this the symbolic life. When the self leads, you no longer live by a checklist. You live by sensation, by vibration, by symbols that only you can understand. You begin to notice your dreams, not to analyze them, but to listen. You sense synchronicities, not as coincidences, but as reminders. You pay attention to things once dismissed as unreal, because they carry the language of the soul. The self does not force. It branches inside you like water seeking a new path. And little by little, the self takes you somewhere you've never been before. But that feels deeply familiar. It's not a location. It's the feeling, I am in the right place, even if I can't explain why. This is the beginning of true meaning, not meaning built on goals, but meaning felt from the quiet rhythms of being alive. You once thought awakening was the final destination, but it turns out it was only the first step. Because after the ego dissolves, the self doesn't bring you back to your old life. It doesn't rebuild the same house using different materials. The self rebuilds you, using materials that have never been used before, no longer driven by the need to be seen, no longer fueled by the desire to lead, no longer caught in the belief that I have to do something big to prove I am worthy. Now, you act not because you should, but because every part of you says yes. You say no to something that once felt like a dream, because it no longer matches your frequency. You say yes to something that was never part of the plan, because it touches something deep inside. You no longer chase clarity. You trust what feels true. And strangely, the moment you stop running after the right goal, you begin to live rightly. No more striving, only alignment. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Now you are no longer living from the unconscious. You are living from the self, clarified and awake, not as a new version of yourself, but as you, with no version needed. You no longer crave admiration. You crave authenticity, no longer living to meet expectations. You live to express presence, fully, sincerely. This rebirth isn't cinematic. It's quiet, steady. It begins within and expands outward like a flame that doesn't need wind to keep burning. And if you feel you're nearing this threshold, no longer lost in the blank space, but beginning to see hints of color returning, then come with me, just a little further, not to find an ending, but to touch, one last time, the truest meaning of this entire journey. It was never about falling apart. It was always about coming home. Maybe, after everything you've been through, you still have nothing to call an achievement, nothing to show off, no product to display, no result to prove you've made it. But there's one thing only you can know. You are no longer the person who began this journey. You once lived like a character following a pre-written script, and one day you dropped the lines, not because you were rebelling, but because you began to hear a whisper beneath the dialogue. You once believed you had to know every step ahead. Then you learned to wait, to see what would call to you. No rushing, no forcing, just letting life find its way to you. You once feared losing motivation. Then you discovered you didn't need motivation. You needed resonance, the alignment between what's inside and what's unfolding outside, between the soul's rhythm and the rhythm of each passing moment, between silence and presence. You no longer live to run, you live to feel, and that changes your entire operating system. There are no more right goals, only right timing, no more perfect answers, only raw honesty, no more who will I become, only what is living through me right now. And maybe, for the first time in your life, you no longer feel like a fraud. You're not trying to get better. You're not trying to go back to normal. You're not trying to rise and grind again. You're simply listening to what wants to live through you. It might be an idea, a form of service, a creative act, a new kind of love. It doesn't need a label. You only need to feel that you are no longer lost within yourself. Carl Jung didn't promise a clear path. He left no map. He only gave us one truth. We're not here to be perfect. We're here to be whole. And wholeness is not the absence of cracks. Wholeness is staying with the parts you once abandoned. Wholeness is no longer being divided from your own being. If you're still here, if you've walked with me from the beginning to this moment, pausing at every silence, allowing your deeper layers to speak, then maybe you've begun something no one else can begin for you. You don't have to understand it yet. You don't have to define it. Just let the echo of this journey rest inside you, like a seed. A seed doesn't need to bloom right away. It only needs to be trusted. And someday, in a moment, no one will remember. Maybe during a quiet afternoon, you will realize, I've changed. Not because you did something, but because you were quiet enough for the self to finally take shape. Thank you for having the courage to go deep. Thank you for not turning away. Thank you for walking through the mapless places. If something in this touched the silence inside you, leave a sign, not for anyone else, but for yourself, to mark the moment you truly began. The journey isn't over, but from now on, you are no longer walking alone, because the self, once again, has found a vessel. And this time, it's no longer hiding. I'll meet you on the other side of the melting